Good evening. Welcome to another edition of the 1873 Conversations on the Future That I Can Only Imagine. We are going on with this idea that is proposed by Professor Mutambara that Mugabe actually is very shallow. Intellectually, he is challenged. This is the version of Professor Mutambara in an interview conducted by the editor of NewZimbabwe.com. And is Mugabe intellectually inadequate, personally insecure? Welcome, Savannah. How valid is this assertion that Mugabe actually is an intellectual midget? Yet the facts could suggest otherwise. We are on the second edition of this conversation. What is your take on this idea that Mugabe, the president of Zimbabwe, and the only leader the post-colonial Zimbabwean dispensation has known, is intellectually challenged? And this leads to a more critical question that has to be posed. Does Zimbabwe require an intellectually gifted person? Is that the case, that statecraft, as we know it, in a republican constitutional order, requires thought leadership? If so, how best can this gifted person be identified, selected, appointed, and even supervised in between elections? The question posed to Professor Mutambara was, Zimbabwe's economy has been in crisis for nearly 2 decades now. But your impression was that Mugabe is not interested in that side of his responsibilities as president. As already explained, that's Professor Mutambara responding, his motivation is primarily political, with a power retention strategy as the core ambition. Economic matters are secondary, if not peripheral. Welcome, Tendai Choto. Let's look at this question, maybe using a different lens or a different perspective. Even if Mugabe was interested, let's assume interest is a variable, in transforming the fortunes of the universe of the people who live in Zimbabwe. Take your guess, maybe 13 million people. How would Mugabe's personal interest in economics be the deciding factor or the trigger to the prosperity that is promised as part of the life ecosystem? Does a president have the responsibility to be interested? And if so, who would judge interest? Let's say a president in the State House, the House of the People, has interest, how would he exhibit that interest? By putting graphs, charts, and scenarios about the future that can only occur outside his control. If we accept that sovereignty is vested in the individual, that all of us are sovereign, not because the president is interested or not, that all of us have the willpower to decide how we should experience life, that all of us are possessed with reason. Now we are being told that no, the country requires a president who has got an interest, an eye on the ball, that his motivation is primarily political. I guess there's no other way to become a president in a democracy other than through the political stage of life. And power retention, if that is an objective, I guess every politician actually has that core objective. Why set up a political party or association and you don't have an intention to actually be relevant in matters of statecraft? Even economic matters were primary, not peripheral. What is it that a president can do within the four corners of his own personal life, the state itself, the corridors of power, having perimeters? Savannah says, no, I do not agree. Mutambara is showing selective erudition and as academic arrogance. Mugabe is not shallow or an intellectual midget. Mutambara is to understand politics is not robotics. That's a comment that is made that actually a fool would not last 37 plus years in State House. That maybe we don't understand who Mugabe is, but should we suffer the burden of understanding one individual? If we started understanding Mugabe, wouldn't it be self-evident that we have to understand everybody? Imagine I had to have the occupation of reading someone's mind and then coming out with conclusions as fact that Mawere is stupid because he said this to me. What kind of civilization would we be able to be part of, where we become the judge of a person's interest or lack thereof? Simon Sevenzai Chibaya, welcome. Then the next question, and his attitude to borrowing by the state. Apparently he believes that the country can borrow and borrow without paying its debts. I guess he is not alone, because for you to be president, actually you don't make any financial investment anyway. Whether you're a professor, you're a doctor, you're a mister, you are a nobody, it doesn't change. Shouldn't change. I think yesterday we were saying, let's have a town hall meeting. I thought people were going to come back to me. But again, we are back to the default stage where I can only assist in terms of reading in the hope that these conversations actually can be self-propelling and self-led. Because what we're dealing with here, we're dealing with two lenses of the man who is the president. there are two people actually in place. One is the person of Mugabe. Two is the second person created in terms of the constitution, which is the president of Zimbabwe. What can the president of Zimbabwe do that the person of Mugabe does not enable that person? What are the features and characteristics of a human being? We all don't have to see to be human. We all don't have to have two legs to be human. We all don't have to hear to be human. We all don't have to have hands to be human. So what makes us human is that we got a mind. And that mind gives us certain properties, including free will and the power to reason. But that power to reason is sometimes informed by the environment that we live our lives. Secondly, by the people we associate with. That we all agree that we enter into this world with nothing. And there's no exception. No president enters the human society already stocked in a fridge with additional wisdom. That everything we then say we know is actually coming from the innate gifts given already and the experiences that then define and shape your character and personality. This then brings to the fore, what can one individual possibly be capable of knowing? Even if we were to give him 24 plus 1 hour, where would the 1 hour come from? Assume the same president actually has to be able to think, to sleep, to eat, to wash, to dress, to do the things that all of us are subjected to as part of life. I can't ask someone to sleep on my behalf. I can't ask someone to go to the toilet on my behalf. I have to suffer that obligation. And Kuzi Muyangwa, a pleasant day to you, Mutuma. Thank you very much for wishing me the pleasantest. Savannah says, we come unbidden into this life. And if we are lucky, we find a purpose beyond starvation and misery. I associate myself with that. And like George Washington said, I walk on untrodden ground. That is there's no one who is accepted from that limitation. That we actually start life not knowing what the next second brings. Now there is a new narrative, which is a new lens that is being produced or given by Professor Mutambara, having been a deputy prime minister and President Mugabe's cabinet. He says his boss ought to have been intelligent, and the people of Zimbabwe made a mistake if they did elect him, unless one follows the other narrative, which says he rigged the election, therefore he is not legit. So one would say Mugabe rigged the election. So rigging itself, perhaps it may require some mischief and smartness. Because if you rig and you win, then it means you've successfully executed the art of rigging. And most people actually associate Mugabe's win with rigging. Therefore, it requires some intelligence to rig, and you are not caught by your adversaries who also are equally determined to win or were equally determined to win. This issue of debt, yes, what is the alternative when the income generating capacity of Zimbabwe has been deteriorating every day under the watch of all of us, including Professor Mutambara? Where are the solutions to be found? Where is wisdom to be found? Is it those who have the academic qualifications, who then say, because I passed this exam and passed that exam, therefore I have a better claim on the solutions that human life actually generate? We all know that life itself is not as easy as we think it should be. The misery, the starvation is actually an integral part of life. That life can turn sour for everybody, for anybody. But what would make us think that a person elected, it's like a beauty pageant, that if I win a beauty pageant, then I say I am the smartest woman or I'm the prettiest woman, not only for the people who competed, but I am the universally gifted person. Is that a narrative that we ought to invest in? Or we ought to treat the person of Mugabe as a human being limited by the limitations imposed on all of us? That he can't have 3 eyes. He can't have four ears. He's just a person, a mortal human being, fallible as I am, and a narrow as I may be, selfish as I know, we all are guilty of, irrational as we all can be sometimes, evil as we all can rise up to that address of evil, meanness that we all cannot escape the mischief of life. We have, Savannah, you come back, intelligence is not passing an exam, and life is not about degrees. Life, in a Republican order, the fundamental principle is that we are all created equal. And our equality is not a gift. It's not somebody who decrees that you must be president. If that is the case, then all the philosophers of yesterday, all the thinkers of yesterday would have visited the corridors of power and would have made it an address. What is it about this president? There is a mischief in the idea of president and the power that is assumed to be resident after election in that person. Life is not an exam either, Savannah says. We should rest all our hopes in one human being. We should never rest. We can't. A human being is a human being. A human being has got family, has got relatives, is subjective, perhaps inherently corrupt. Because corruption itself starts from this favor that human beings cannot escape the mischief of life. That itself does not allow you to know the best doctor, does not allow you to know the best engineer. It only allows you to know the people who have been revealed to you. And if you are a president, there will be fewer and fewer people that you know, because the system itself, comprised of human beings, will make it sure that you become so ignorant. Even when you are naked, they will tell you you are dressed, because they need you to be the biggest fool. And they make you a fool because you end up thinking that you are actually a little better than everybody else when you're just a normal human being. If Professor Mutambara, having been in government for 5 years, comes out with this assumption that you must be a thought leader to be a president, then what did he learn in government? Did he learn that Mugabe was a man of flesh? Or is he saying that actually the masses of Zimbabwe made a mistake by electing or choosing Mugabe to be president when he is deficient intellectually as judged by another human being of flesh? He says a reckless attitude. Indeed. Yes, Mugabe is a president. Does Mugabe know everything? Should he know everything? Should he be the genius? If so, who would remove him from power? Because geniuses think they're entitled to be in government. Sometimes they actually don't think anybody else has a better claim to be in government than they are. And we have some comments. His remarks are tantamount to hearsay. Farai Mbango just joined, welcome. Michelle Chuhuri, the only solution is God, Professor. Michelle Chuhuri is so true. And let's go back to Zimbabwe today. The biggest mistake is to make one person one center of hope and power. No, not even make. We can't make someone a center of anything. We can hallucinate, we can imagine, we can pontificate. But the person that we are putting our hopes on does not change from being a human being like you and me, Savannah. If you ever put your hope and power, how would you do it? Hopes are personal. Power itself is inherent in you. It's not capable of being given to anybody. Elections don't have that property. You vote independent of the person who then becomes president. So you're a step removed. So if a person is a fool before elections, I don't think you'll be smart because you've voted. There is no life-altering mechanism inherent in voting. Yet voting is the only evil we know. There are other ways of assuming this so-called authority. I was talking earlier with Sovereign here and say maybe we should call it authority, not power. Because power is deceptive, because we assume that somebody acquires that which cannot be transferable, assignable, negotiable. I can't negotiate my being and transfer it to somebody else. I can't outsource life. Then you say, Mutambara with his robotics failed from day one and made huge mistakes. This debate is not about Mutambara, the person, but the world view that he is projecting is actually a view that is held by many. And we're just using Mutambara not to castigate him, but to be able to negotiate with him so that he can also see the world the way we are seeing it. If we negotiate better, to say no, it's about time people realize that hopes are personal. Power itself is incapable of being outsourced. With this big brain, yes, you can do that with your brain. But this we're talking about people's power, people's project. Government itself cannot be reduced to a personal journey. With this, he did not figure he was joining the wrong side of politics. So I don't know which is the right side. But what I do know is that Mutambara is a person of flesh. He's got a mind that can be wrong. He's got a mind that can also be right. Sadly, as the people were wired to glorify individuals, that is the problem. We have to exorcise Simbarashe. We have to exercise this idea that the neighbor is more gifted than me. And therefore the neighbor who has gone to the best schools, who has eaten the best caviar, has better solutions. This is why prophets have found it is to flourish in Harare, and politicians find it is to manipulate the majority. You can't manipulate the majority. Generally, we as human beings are trusting. And we want to be led. We want to be followers. There are many people who would say, why don't you think of becoming a president? Then you look at the person. He's got 2 legs, 2 ears, 2 eyes. I say, why would you want somebody else to do something that you think is a problem and you don't want to be a problem solver? If you think this job requires a genius, then fight for election to be annulled, to be cancelled, terminated, removed from the ecosystem. And then say, guys, let's have a new system where we can be able to do the things that we can do. And there's a Malinga Kumbu says, you must get into government, Mutuma Moire. Get Arthur Mutambara, Tendai Bit and David Calder, and get Zimbabwe working again. Again, Malinga, that's the idea that we are trying to cleanse. That there are special people. That exceptionalism is what has killed many countries. That so and so, because he's talking sense, then that is tantamount to good statecraft. Learn from the mistakes of today. Learn from the mistakes of yesterday, where people who were called liberators were speaking nice English, eloquent English. They can craft a speech, but they don't understand the human spirit. The human spirit itself is ungovernable. It's the spirit that would take a young boy from Guatemala and you say, where are you going? He says, I'm going to America. He arrives in Mexico. They catch him. They put him in detention. He says, you put me in the wrong detention. I would rather be in the detention of America. That boy will always look for a way out to get away from where he is, to go where his spirit wants to take him. When he arrives in America penniless, he says, I have arrived. What would make that person risk everything with nothing other than the spirit that where I'm going, it can't be worse than where I'm coming from? That spirit does not require a doctorate. That spirit does not require a witch doctor. That spirit is inherently human. It will see a guy from Somalia crossing all the borders and say, where are you going? If he has not arrived, you say, no, I'm in Zimbabwe, but I want to get into South Africa. The moment he arrives in South Africa, yes, he takes a breath and says, thank God, if he's a Christian. Or he says, Allah, this is what you have taken me this far. Grace has taken me into this territory. I may fail, but I'll fail on my terms. I may succeed, I will succeed on my terms. No, Mawere is good where he is. Imagine Mawere in government, limited to grow in business. He is better off in private sector, I hope. I'm not better off anyway. I'm better off where there are problems. Right now there's a problem of understanding. That's why I am having this conversation with you. Because if Professor Mutambara gets it wrong, How many other people who get it wrong, believing that actually professors can't be wrong, liberators can't be wrong. So the problems that we face, Savannah, sometimes it's literacy, that ignorance can be a worse disease. That if we're smart, we don't need a smart president. It must be self-evident. Because we own the project. It is our project, and the power that flows from it must have a source. If you are the source, then it is you who creates income that then becomes income tax. You can't have income tax without income. So Miriam, Pfeiffer, good evening, good people. I guess I'm one of the good people. So anyone who is there who is a good person, you are being greeted. Then Maxwell Sangweme, welcome to this arena where ideas are the currency and where we have to think sometimes outside the box. And this box requires us to imagine a Zimbabwe. Where would we start imagining this child called Zimbabwe? What would be the imagination? Where would it take us? So we're just trying to use Professor Mutambara, not to castigate him, so next time he won't speak his mind, he will be politically correct. We want him to speak his mind so that he can allow us to critique him in the best of all traditions without personalizing views. I can't say Mugabe is shallow because it's none of my business. If he's shallow, fine. But what kind of a president do I need to see in Zimbabwe? Do we need an intellectually gifted president? Or we need something that we are not talking about? Let's talk about this character called president. Is he benefit of feeling? Now he's going to feeling. He's being asked, Professor Mutambara, is he completely unaffected by the impact of the resultant economic problems on ordinary people? The Mugabe hierarchy of importance alluded to earlier explains this. The economic challenges experienced by ordinary people are at level 4 in terms of importance. I hear you, Mtuma. Patriotism has to be more of loyal to the nation than to a particular individual party. Yes, Kuzai. What is the nation? How can I be loyal to something? Self-interest to me is a powerful instrument in the human ecosystem. Absent self-interest, what remains? Cannot be a human being. Patriotism and loyalty to the nation, to the country, then who am I? Who is this nation? You may ask yourself. Marvin Maduna Ngomo, welcome. Then we are being told that Mugabe must have feelings. Imagine Mugabe had the feelings of the country. Imagine, then what? Huh? That Mugabe has got a hierarchy of importance. Yeah? And that he doesn't. Any president is immune from the daily tribulations and pain that individuals suffer. I have yet to see a president who is not guarded. I have yet to see a president who lives in in a township or shanty town or whatever, or township. I've seen them visit, but I have not seen a president anywhere in the world who would be giving up a meal so that people can eat. When hungry, I've seen president want to eat like me. Where is this address where a president suddenly becomes this benevolent, Jesus-like, Prophet Muhammad-like character who comes to save other people from hunger when he is hungry himself? Some people go into politics because they're hungry. And that's the only way to have a secure meal. So why should Mugabe be exceptional? That we want him to know the universe of experiences of poor people. So that what would he do in his condition? His fixation in politics, though, and political gamesmanship, that is the question that is then raised. As explained earlier, this fixation is driven by the views Machiavelli as expounded in the book The Prince. Is it correct that Mugabe knows Machiavelli, memorizes Machiavelli, or he's just living his own life, surrounded by people who glorify him, who look up to him, who thinks he's God sent because he has given them a better life than anyone else? Absent Mugabe, there are many careers that will be ruined. Professor, this is not about reading a book. I don't think so. This is not about gamesmanship. There are people right now who would glorify, kiss Mugabe's ass just to survive an extra day. These are human beings like you and me. Does it make Mugabe the master of all geniuses? No. Just makes him ordinary. In fact, we should be using that to say, President, under your watch, there are more things that are done in your name, and you have no capacity to know. And even if you had to have 30 million lifetimes, you'll still not be able to know the true nature of man. And the relationship between man and reality is not that self-evident, it's not that obvious. The Prince, however, Mugabe's interpretation is a primitive understanding. That primitive, who measures what is primitive and superior understanding of the Machiavellian philosophy and strategy? As the later book, The Discourses, refined the disposition to include legacy and positive social, political and economic impact as objectives of a prince. That is the prince in the book. Mugabe has told everyone who cared to listen that please, 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 I am not passing the baton to anybody. It's illegal, it's unconstitutional, period. Yet Professor thinks otherwise. Who are you referring to? This prince is very clear that he is loved by the people of Zimbabwe. And therefore he's not going anywhere. So get over this idea that Mugabe has got any intention to have a legacy of passing on the baton, when in his construction no baton was ever passed on to him. Looking ahead to next year's elections, you are not optimistic. You said 2008 devastated Mugabe so much that ZANU will rig him a victory next year. So if Mugabe is a rigger, how did you become prime minister? Shouldn't you give your own life experience as one testament or testimonial that actually Mugabe is a bad rigger? Why would he rig himself to share power? If he could, why would he rig himself to result in other people, MDC getting seats in parliament, getting mayoral positions? Let's study this. So if he rigs, then Professor, you're a product of rigging. Is that the argument that you want to advance? And if we advance that argument, how far would it take us? Is it Mambi says following? That idea of following is what we need to deal with. Good evening, Molly, Kandia Piri, Marvin, I already greeted. That idea of following. Can you add me on Zimbabwe today? Yes, you can be added. There is no problem with addition. You want to call? Zim politics, says Marvin, is too bloody and very corrupt. I, for one, don't know what the truth is. It's all propaganda. That's let me just check whether I can do it. Yes, following the live conversation and opinion. Thank you, Mambi, for following. Marvin, you make a point that is too bloody, but it doesn't include your blood. Very corrupt, but doesn't include you as a corrupt person. Let us see the world the way it is, not the way we want it to be. I think we all have a duty to think, not to imagine that which is not necessary to imagine. So if we imagine a corrupt society, then we must place human beings in that ecosystem. Human beings can be dishonest. Human beings can actually manufacture facts to live above their means. And human beings are inherently random. Human beings will always feel the pinch if you step on their toes. They cannot outsource pain. So there are things we learn about life which we must celebrate. Our humanity is actually not an invention. It's not something we can buy. It's something we actually celebrate. And imagine imagine WhatsApp was revealed, all the messages that are there. Can you imagine what would happen to this ecosystem? Imagine you knew what someone else doesn't want you to know. And we invested in knowing how mischievous human beings can become. Just imagine that even a president is just a human being. Okay. Savannah, I'm trying to connect you, but can you call me? That may be better. Or let's see whether I can add you. I can add you on the, I think there has to be some way. Let me check. Okay. Okay, I'll see what we can do. Then we have going into politics, Mawere, should be guided by the liberation struggle objectives. That is to liberate and improve Zimbabwean masses' lives against personal aspiration to enrich and empower oneself. Again, I'm not sure how far this liberation struggle and how long the string should be. I think you may know better, Edwin Mukere, that politics is just one theater to save humanity. It is not exclusive, but it's ordinary. It allows all of us to see where we can best serve. What are the key problems that we think ought to be the problems that require our collective attention? If you agree with me, Edwin, you may discover that ignorance can be a more cancerous disease than having a smart person becoming a president. And Kuma said Mugabe rigged the elections in 2002, and he's stating as fact. If you have facts, how could you have participated in blindfolding you and others in 2002 and 2008? And his Apex S card he always uses is tribalism, exactly like Kenyans, too tribalistic to the core. I don't know how far we can extend this conversation, because if you know that's something we don't know, please tell us. Then Mutambara says, clearly they will not allow the defeat of 2008 to occur. Actually, 2008 is part of our history. That is the same election that allowed Professor Mutambara to be Deputy Prime Minister. If Mugabe was as efficient and effective manipulator of elections, would Professor Mutambara have been Deputy Prime Minister? As we all know, who is we? All know. Am I part of the we? The 2008 first round result of 47.3% versus 42.3% outcome was doctored or rigged. Were you there when it was being rigged? If so, why didn't you protest there as an active citizen, Professor? Why talk about things that you may not have been party to? only because you want to make a point. And what is the point you want to make? That Zimbabwe requires a leader of your stature, leader of your intellect, leader of your activism, leader of your worldview. What is the point that is being made? That Zimbabwe requires a thought leader, that Zimbabwe must actually stop inviting intellectually challenged people to come into State House and call it home. Such an outcome will not be allowed. And are you suggesting that an outcome that produces you as president should actually be the better outcome? ZANU-PF has to get at least 50% plus one vote. Come hell, come sunshine. Where is this coming from? Because for you to be prime minister, Mugabe himself got 42.3%, which was less than Tsvangirai in the first round. If he was as efficient as you are crediting him with this power of rigging, surely that's not a good sign for someone to rig himself out of what? Out of 50 plus 1. Then the humiliation 2008 was severe, even after the rigging. How can a person who rigs be humiliated by his own processes? Please, Professor, help us understand the logic, because we are losing it. We need to understand the basis on which some of these assumptions are made and conclusion drawn. Mugabe is living his vision of a one-party state. I don't think so. Zimbabwe is not a one-party state. There are legislators in the parliament of Zimbabwe who don't belong to this club called ZANU-PF. Of him being the supreme leader of Zimbabwe, in his mind, is giving his people their needs. Mugabe has said, I've subjected myself to elections. That's his view. And for 37 years, nobody has found a better formula to remove me. That's how you would say it. Within and outside the party of ZANU-PF. The system is devised is one such. This system, one individual, sketch for us, Kudzi, the parameters, the A to Z of this alleged system. That has made him the center and source for survival. Is it the case that people who are starving today need salvation from Mugabe? It's very difficult to accumulate with wealth without the blessing of Mugabe, so to speak. Hey, what does that make Mugabe now? Kudzi makes him a little God. Huh? A little Pope of Rome. A little Salvation Army. A little Mother Teresa. Is that the way you want Mugabe to be treated and to be known? Okay. Yeah. Tanaka Rangwani says, you are just a washed up old man still living in the old glory days. I guess he means me. That I'm living in the glorious days. I'm not sure which days. But this is somebody's perception of this enterprise. So let's proceed with our conversation. Elliot Mbuya, Musa Nathan Ziva Mpekeri, They're all watching. Okay. So let's see the next one. Okay. Okay, there is now Tapua Mwendamberi, welcome. And the opposition have made it easier for ZANU-PF to rig by failing to agree a coalition where they rally behind one candidate. That is the question that was posed to Professor Mutambara. Unity has political mobilizing impact. It energizes the entire electorate. With one united coalition, change becomes palpable. This generates enthusiasm and confidence in those who want change across the country, including those who are not directly involved in opposition parties. Unity is not just about adding numbers of opposition votes, it is more than that. Now, by failing to establish one coalition group, the benefits I have outlined will not materialize. More importantly, the lack of unity in opposition forces gives ZANU-PF plausible rationale for the rigged outcome. No, we did not rig. They lost because they were fragmented. There will be many takers for this explanation. You also say the opposition is a desperate collection of contradictions, united only by the desire to remove Mugabe and ZANU-PF from power. Why can't that shared desire facilitate a coalition that backs one candidate against Mugabe? First and foremost, that desire to remove Mugabe has not worked as glue in the pursuit of one giant coalition against ZANU-PF. I wish it did. They must keep trying. My view is that beyond the change agenda, we must address the issue of the content, ideology, and substance of the change. That's Professor Mutambara's response. So you may have your own comments on that. And what is Professor Mutambara saying? And your thoughts are welcome. Let me put the final treatise. Mr. Mpekeri say there is London and Ms. Paris Mashile, welcome. So I will. Hello? Hello? can you, London Kunesi disappeared before answering. Hello? 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 Kanesi? Hello? Okay, this is the final part. The question: having failed to force implementation of reforms to facilitate a fair and free and credible contest, should the opposition contest next year's elections? Yes, they must, even if it means testing the systems, the laws, regulations, and procedures, thus exposing the rigging infrastructure. However, all this must be done under one giant coalition to make the rigging exercise tougher to implement and harder to explain away. Here we learn from Professor that actually rigging is a fact, but yet no evidence is provided to advance this idea or this hypothesis of rigging. Your impressions on potential political leaders from ZANU-PF and those from opposition parties, I leave that to their party members and the electorate. I would rather concentrate on the big picture, the state of play, the contradictions and possibilities in the broader theme of politics, the economy and social dynamics in our country, Zimbabwe. And lastly, coming to you, have you taken permanent leave of Zimbabwean politics? How do you envision your role in the country's affairs presently and going forward? I have certainly not taken a permanent leave of Zimbabwean politics. I keep my options open. I've just been concentrating on writing and documenting as part of the struggle for a peaceful, prosperous and democratic Zimbabwe. So Professor Mutambara has said in so many ways that he is available, but he is looking for the bus to take him to the destination that he thinks he ought to be in order to be able to be a contributor to the problem-solving agenda that Zimbabwe and the actors in the country are missing. What is your take on this conversation? Did you benefit anything from it? If so, please do tell us, because sometimes we can be experts at talking at ourselves. So I may be saying the obvious in a not too obvious manner. So if there is anything that you have drawn from this conversation, that actually Mugabe is an intellectual fraud, Mugabe is an intellectual midget, that the job of the president of Zimbabwe requires somebody that is not Mugabe. Because Mugabe himself is not a person with the characteristics that Professor Mutambara would look to. That's what Professor Mutambara is saying. In so many ways, He's saying the opposition does not have a person of his caliber. He is also saying that Mugabe doesn't have the qualities required to discharge the obligations to deliver the promise of this so-called leader in Zimbabwe. What is your take? What is your viewpoint? Sometimes we actually defer to others to think. Sometimes we actually refuse to think. Sometimes we neglect to think. Sometimes we just fail to think. Because common sense is not very common. Logic is not very common. Reason is inherent in all of us, but sometimes we refuse to ignite it so that we think and live up to the promise why we are not animals and why we are human beings. So if you look at the way we have so far characterized this leadership idea, we have always put a face to it. We have always imagined the leader to be this enlightened person, educated person, smart person, and benevolent person. Is that the intent of a Republican constitution, to deliver this promise of this imagined clairvoyant armed with all the knowledge that is required to be able to live up to that promise? Welcome, Tipe, Nyasha. How do we humanize this character called the president? How do we remove the mask of alleged invincibility, alleged indispensability? It starts with you. It starts with me. To begin to think, and think we must, about the promise of government and its actors. Where do you think the place of government is and ought to be? Should it be where we have placed fallible and sinful human actors? Do you really believe that government can solve problems through its actors? That you elect solutions to human problems? That elections can produce craft competence, craft excellence? That the academic qualifications we go to school for are relevant in the art or enterprise or problem solving? If that were the case, I guess most of the professors would actually be billionaires. But life is not that straightforward. It allows people who may seem to be intellectual midgets to be invincible, to be indispensable to others. So what is it that we learn from all this? If you have learned something, actually it's your turn. educate me. I was trying to get hold of Savannah, but it looks like on Zimbabwe today, we can't be able to correct. So if you have any lasting comments, I can say we've finished that part of the discussion. Otherwise, I end up talking to myself. And I think, I presume also President Mugabe is tired of talking to himself. There are many followers who actually have just perfected the art of silently following, or the silence of the lambs. Are you one of them? Because I see it alive and well in these conversations. I see people want the easy road of talking about things that don't exist, but we want to give them legs, eyes, ears. But facts on their own would show and reveal that the last 37 years of independence have produced something that the people who travel the journey were never prepared for. And I guess when people look back and try to stress where it all started, if it is 1980 where it started, where the promise started, and journey through to 2017, and you arrive on this day of November, the 2nd of November, what would you say about this journey? Would you be satisfied that we have actually done what we should have done, what we ought to have done, but in this mistaken idea that the neighbor, the president, actually is possessed with a magic touch. That idea has actually undermined the real promise or the true promise. Where are all the professionals? Mandi Madaweni asks. They may say, do we need professionals in a conversation about your interest and future? Those who cross the Mediterranean in search for higher ground, greener pastures, do you think they even factor the word professional in the enterprise of migration? Or just fed up and saying, I can't take this anymore. Some just leave because of that feeling. They feel so disconnected. They feel that there must be fate that will work its magic touch. That mortality itself is pregnant with answers. There are some who say, Zimbabwe is somebody else's business. My business is to focus on my silo or focus on my wagon because it's heavy anyway without others. So these are the things that I thought we should share, and I will obviously look at my time and say I have shared some food for thought, and that can make you step back, reflect, think again, and think again, and think again about what kind of Zimbabwe you want to see. Do you want this omnipresent superstructure called president? Or you just want an ordinary human being to be president? And if he doesn't do the job that you put him to do, then you must have the power to recall him, not to be afraid of him. Is that the Zimbabwe that you want to see? If it is, how best can it be secured? Through your own actions, not through the actions of others. So, there we go. Anyone with the last word? Now I understand how lonely Mugabe must feel, surrounded by people who are silent as part of an enterprise of perfecting the promise of life. So there is nothing that I can do to ignite sleeping. People who have constructively said life is just too complicated for me to bother. And whose problems are they anyway? Tipe Nyasha says silent and scared, the two S's. Simple and stupid, but they are very poignant. They are, is it poignant? They are big facts to pay. Silence on what matters is more violent than saying something on what doesn't matter. Scared, yes, we must. But scared of who, we must ask. Who is to scare you out of hunger, out of pain? What would that scaring constitute? If you are afraid, Tipe, those who are weaker than you become strong. If you are silent on what matters, the future may never know that you are part of this nightmare. So where are we to go? Because what Tipe is saying is real. There are people who fear their servants. There are people who are scared to lose the little that they have. Yet deep inside, they are burning. They are in pain, saying, when is salvation going to come? And who is going to deliver salvation? Or the promise of it? There are people who say, yes, I can't. Not yes, I can. Because it is my power that creates government. It is my silence also that creates government. It is my acquiescence that creates government. It is also my consent that creates government. Government is not created out of someone's stomach. So there is no salvation. So, what is the way forward? I am 16 past. So do you want another session on this subject matter of understanding statecraft, understanding not Mugabe, but government and its office bearers, including the government? If you think it's important, I'll wait to see 6 people, then we close the show. If you just say Y for yes, N for no, when I get 50 plus 1 out of 10, then I know what I am giving up time for could be worthwhile. So I'm counting down. Tipe, Nyasha, yes. Thank you, Tipe. Any seconder? Any seconder? Any seconder? Tapiwa Munyawiri, number 2. Anyone who is number 3? Please don't make me Mugabe. Don't make me lonely, where I have the burden to think about the future of so many, but the so many are not willing to step up to the plate. I got only 2 yes out of 10, which means we are 20%. We are a failure. So if you are out there, putting a Y is the least you can do to make sure that we are more organized and we know where we stand. Any number 3? Charles Manyozo. We got number 3. Any number 4? Anyone? Samuel Maramba, welcome. Any number 4? I now have 30%. This is frustrating, but I guess that's the Zimbabwe, not of our dreams. Zimbabwe of today. Anyone up to 5? Anyone? So we got 3. So I will say goodbye. We can't wait. So until we meet again, goodbye.